Greetings, everyone, and welcome to From the Dust of History, a production of the Biblical History Center. I'm your host, Ben Stevens, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Emily Pritchett and Christy Barker. We got a fascinating topic lined up for you today, some interesting finds out of the Megiddo Roman legionary camp. So let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, maybe Christy can explain where Megiddo is.
Yeah, so today we are talking about the ongoing excavations of Megiddo. So Megiddo is in what is called the Jezreel Valley, which is between kind of northern Israel and Jerusalem. So we're not quite to Galilee. It's not quite that far north, but it's between Galilee and Jerusalem. And it's Tel Megiddo is an archaeological mound where there is I believe, Bronze and Iron Age habitation of different cities. It's actually mentioned in the Old Testament as one of Solomon's chariot cities and was inhabited before then by several different people. But this is where Napoleon went and said, this is the perfect battlefield. It's said that in the book of Revelation, this is possibly where Armageddon will take place because it is a large plain, but you can still find defensive positions in the Tell or in a few surrounding hills. And so it would be a place for the perfect battle. So yeah, that's kind of where we see Megiddo. The Romans strategically placed Legio 6 here around 66 AD. So right before Jerusalem falls, right before the beginning of the first Jewish revolt, and they stationed Legio 10 in Jerusalem. So this was very strategic of the Romans. Megiddo is very central. You can easily reach many towns, both north, south, and middle of Israel from Megiddo, but also you can easily reach the north or support Jerusalem from Megiddo should there be a problem there. Jerusalem was kind of known as the main hotspot. You don't want to go too far north in Israel if you're stationing Roman troops, just because there were large Roman populations in the Galilee area. So they were thinking probably, okay, this area is going to kind of take care of itself. If we're going to experience any military problems, it's probably going to be further south towards the Jerusalem area. So they've concentrated their two permanent legions there, and these are actually the only two permanent Roman camps that have been found in the land of Israel.
There certainly must have been a decent amount of soldiers there. Do you have any idea what kind of numbers you'd be thinking of? And you know, we have typical numbers for legions and things of that nature, but for this frontier region, is there any estimate?
Probably around 5,000, give or take.
Okay.
5,000 to 6,000, because a legion is divided into 10 cohorts, and then each of those cohorts is going to hold a couple hundred people. So we're looking at 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers, but that includes kind of everybody. So heavy infantry, light infantry, maybe some cavalry, depending on where you are and if that's practical for the region.
And this was a specific legion, wasn't it? This is what was called the Ironclad Legion. And I believe you told me before, this is historically it is the Julius Caesar Legion. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. So Legio 6 was also known as Legio 6 Ferrata. Probably not saying that right because it's Latin, but okay. And Ferrata basically just means iron or armored. So they're known as the Iron Legion or the Armored Legion. And they were actually formed during the age of the Roman Republic. So this legion dates all the way back to 52 BC and was formed by Gaius Julius Caesar, also known as Julius Caesar, the first emperor of Rome in some people's eyes. And so this was his legion. These are his guys. These guys are called iron or armored because they are the guys that you send in when stuff needs to get done. They get it done. They're very battle hardened, especially since they started under Julius Caesar. They're known for being loyal, steadfast, dependable. They're the guys that you send in when you don't want any mess ups.
Right.
So they were known for being dependable, but also just like a brick wall. They get stuff done. And to this point, their legion display, their symbol is sometimes seen as the bull, which is known as very hardy, very steadfast, strong, or the Capitoline wolf, also known as Lupa, the she-wolf, who nursed Romulus and Remus, the two founders of Rome. She's usually seen nursing them in their infancy on the flag. So it
Right.
just shows how central this legion was in Roman importance. But when they were first stationed in Judea, they didn't really take on that significance yet. They were known for being proven and battle hardy under Julius Caesar, but this legion's real claim to fame is them being stationed in Judea, participating in the siege of Jerusalem, and then contributing to the first Jewish revolt and Jerusalem's fall. That's really what made them known as the guys that you send in when stuff needs to get done.
They certainly sound like it, especially being in a frontier region as difficult as Judea, right? We know in multiple points in history that the Romans are going to have a very hard time controlling this area, and it's going to kind of be a thorn in the side, not just for what we think of as the Roman Empire, but even later versions of it, with the split with the Western and the Eastern version, and even the Byzantine empires continually going to have a hard time holding this area. I mean, which you get really further into history, we start getting into more of medieval history, right? And everything with the Crusades and everything. It's a site of contention constantly, which it has been, as you're saying, all the way from the Bronze Age. I believe I read somewhere that Megiddo is considered to be one of the, again, oldest sites. It's up there with Jericho, kind of a pre-Canaanite, right? It's just kind of whoever is in the area, that these Arabic people building these different sites in this area. Really, really, really old. But as you can see, obviously, super important. Now, there was a lot of different items that have been found in this site. I mean, it's obviously been an ongoing excavation. And I know, Emily, you've been in this area as well as Christy, but I know Emily has gotten the opportunity to go and check this site out. But she also, I think, had an idea of some of the items that they found here at the site and the importance of that.
There is a lot of items that have been found, but not just artifacts. It's not just artifacts that you are looking for. You're also looking, one of the big things that you cannot excavate out of the ground and take into the lab to get cataloged is the remains of the Via Praetoria. There's also the architectural remains of a public building. So you know that these soldiers are well established here. They are issuing, Rome's rule in that region. If you got a public building and you got a main road going through it, you're pretty good on the presence there. So that shows us that the presence of these soldiers of the Ironclad Legion is very, very strong in this area. And as Christy mentioned earlier, Megiddo is very strategically placed. Even prior to the Romans, Megiddo was ruled by the Hittites, the Canaanites, even King Solomon at one point. And it's a strategic big city where all of the trade routes would go through or go near. Mm-hmm. They're either going to go through or go near Megiddo. So only the foundations of the buildings have been found, but two roads have been found, and one of those roads was the Via Praetoria. But smaller artifacts that can be cataloged and taken out of the ground, excavated, and analyzed in the lab were coins, lots of different weapons, pottery, glass, and lots of roof tiles. Coins are a wonderful find because if the image has not been corroded or scratched out and it's in pretty good condition, that's going to tell you the ruler, the region it was minted in, the time period. So coins are wonderful to find at a site because of how much detail they give you about that site and about who was there. But the roof tiles is what gets me, because we have roof tiles in our gallery on loan to us from the Nation of Israel that can be seen in our artifacts gallery. And
those are from the 10th Legion, correct?
Yes, I think those are from the 10th Legion.
Okay, cool.
That's Legio 10 Fretensis.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Fretensis. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not good with Latin either, so pardon my Latin.
It's a dead language for a reason.
Yeah.
But
And well,
yes.
another cool thing about the roof tiles though that I just love with these Roman camps is just like the ones in our artifacts gallery, we know they're from Legio 10, Legion, because they stamped their Legion number in there. And so when they're unearthing Megiddo and they see all of these roof tiles, many of them are also stamped with Legio 6.
Hmm.
And probably even Ferrata on there occasionally, depending on how verbose the person making it decided to be that day. And this is so cool because we know that Roman soldiers were the ones making these roof tiles. When you joined the Roman army, you knew that you would also be working a lot of construction and public works, including building your own barracks. So, this wonderful camp that these archaeologists are uncovering was not built by what we would consider to be a professional construction crew. This was built by the legion that would be living there in all of its complexities. These archaeologists, like Emily said, it's not just pottery and coins, although that's really cool. They're unearthing streets and sewers and toilets and like everything. So that don't when you picture a Roman camp and it being laid out, think of it like when you drive onto a military base today in the United States, it's laid out very intentionally and it has all the comforts and accommodations that you would need to live here for a long time, as opposed to roughing it in the wilderness in tents and things. Like this is an actual working barrack made to be a permanent home for these guys for a while.
How long? I know it varies from Roman to Roman. Generally, what's going on in their own lives, how long they're able to make it in legions and generals, of course, things of that nature. But about how long would you expect a Roman to serve a time period there? What would that look like?
We know that it really depends on the time period,
Right.
how long you're going to be serving. For some Roman soldiers, it was 16 years. For others, it was 25. So that's why they're making such nice accommodations. Because if you're going to be stationed somewhere for a while, you could be stationed there for a good chunk of your life. Remember, this
Yeah.
is a time where the average life expectancy was only maybe if you're a guy in your 30s,
Yeah.
maybe 40s. And so if you're stationed somewhere for 16 to 25 years, say you're not moving anywhere, we find that a lot of Romans would just retire where they landed or try and find somewhere fairly cheap in the empire to go. They wouldn't necessarily go back to Rome to live out the rest of their days. Or we do find people to just reconscripting because they don't know any other life and just staying in the army till they die. So
Huh.
if you survive all these wars and things that you're going through, it's going to be about 16 to 25 years.
Wow. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know certainly in the early portion of or the later portion of the Republic and the early portion of the Empire, it was a pretty common theme for Roman soldiers after they finished their Roman service to be awarded land. Would this land, like you're saying, would you retire just in this area? Would you be awarded land in the Judean region?
So by the time we get to imperial Rome, which is kind of what we're seeing here in Judea, that's not the case to my knowledge. Now there are certain towns where we see a lot of Roman soldiers retiring. I believe that Philippia, in Paul's letter to the Philippians, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that that is a town where a lot of Roman soldiers would go to
Hmm.
retire, as well as a few other towns in Asia Minor. And it mostly had to do with access to goods
Yeah.
and cheap cost of living,
Yeah.
where they could farm or do something to support themselves and their families for a while. I think the biggest thing to remember too in this time in Roman history, it was technically illegal for Roman soldiers to be married.
Okay. Wow.
So you would have your woman follow you, but you wouldn't be legally married, or you
Hmm.
would just remain single until you left the military. So this is not a camp either where we're seeing women. There's no family barracks because they thought that their soldiers would fight more aggressively and to the death, if you will, if they knew that they didn't
Right.
have a wife and children that they're trying to survive and go home to.
Yeah, very different from what you would expect to find. I know you mentioned Napoleon earlier, and the logistic trains that would follow those kinds of armies would be
Mhm.
wives and children would would literally follow the husbands to war campaign and stay with them during the duration of that time. It wasn't just food and everything back there. It was literally bringing your home with you to go on a war campaign. And this is very, very different. So, in addition to a lot of these other things that we've been talking about, the tiles, the roof tiles, and things of that nature, and I know Emily mentioned this, the Via Pretoria, but this Via Pretoria certainly has a lot of significance to it, right? It's specifically mentioned in the actual article, and it's a very important find for archaeologists. And I think Christy was telling me a little bit about why that's so important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So every Roman army camp, every permanent camp, like the one that we see here in Megiddo, is set up exactly the same. You do everything exactly the same every single time. There's like a Roman manual. So that way, if you go into any Roman camp as a Roman soldier, even if it's just newly constructed, you know exactly where to find everything without even having to look at a map. So, as an archaeologist, this is incredibly helpful because if you find the Via Pretoria, which is like the main artery, one of the two main roads running through the camp, you know where to find everything else because it's laid out exactly like every single other Roman army camp. So you know where to find the barracks, you know where to find the toilets, you know where to find the which are toilets are very important to find, by the way. I know it sounds really gross, but toilets are not just toilets, it's where you throw stuff away. So we can learn a lot about daily life, what they're eating, what they're drinking. Did they have teeth problems, tooth extractions? It's all going down the toilet, vegetable peelings, whatever. You can find the officers' barracks. You can find everything you could possibly want to find. You can find the cemetery, all based off of the Via Pretoria. So, as an archaeologist, this is exactly what you want to find because once you strike that gold, you can kind of just do some math, lay out your markers, and now you know where everything else is. Dig here.
Branches out from there. You were talking about, how toilets can help us understand the daily lives of these individuals. And this is, a question for anyone here. It's just an interesting thought I had of what life is like for a Roman soldier at this campsite. What is your expectancy when you wake up in the morning? What are you planning to do that day and throughout the week? Right? Is it a same day type of thing? Is it a ritual of doing the same thing every day, or is life freer than we would expect, or is it similar to modern day soldiers?
I would say the biggest difference between modern day soldiers and what we see in a Roman camp is that there's no such thing as a weekend in the
Okay.
ancient Roman world.
Yeah.
So so it's not like, oh yeah, we got Saturday off. No, you don't.
Yeah.
So you're pretty much getting up and working your assignment and your training every day. Now, depending on where you are in the construction of the barracks, in establishing the permanent barracks, that can vary. So once the camp is being constructed, you might be on brick duty. So you're making bricks all day, or you're mixing mud all day, or you're doing that. Once it's constructed, we work out in the gym in the morning and we go and patrol in the afternoon, or vice versa. It probably depends on your assignment. Now, they did have days off. I don't want it to sound like they just worked all day every day,
For
like
16 years.
for 16 years. I'm sure it felt that way sometimes since they didn't have weekends, but you do get the occasional day off. And this is when you go and, mess around with your buddies, you go shopping, you do that. They're sending letters back home. We know
Hmm.
that letters were often traded. We find them all the way in Hadrian's Wall down in Egypt. You find Roman letters from soldiers to their families, their parents, their secret spouses. You find letters all over the empire from these guys. We know that they're trading, they're bringing these goods from foreign lands with them just as personal mementos and things, which is why Buddha statues have been found in Germany from this time.
Yeah.
So that's happening. But on days when they are not off, which means it's probably not a Roman holiday, or officers probably got a few more days off than the privates
Right. Right.
did.
Of course.
They're not digging ditches or stuff, but it could be anything from making bricks, digging ditches, doing patrol, surveillance, scouting. It just depends on the needs of the camp or the empire. So in one way, it's like, okay, we get up every day and we do da 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 da, which I imagine the modern military is like. I've never been in the military personally. But at the same time, depending on the need of the empire, depending on the need, if you're at war, if you're not at war, are you building barracks? Are the barracks already built? The task that you're actually doing can change greatly.
It's interesting. It does, having been in the army as one of those private digging ditches, it does sound somewhat familiar to modern day military practices. I won't say
Yeah.
it was probably as bad as what a Roman soldier would have had, right?
They didn't have coffee.
I did have coffee, and I did, have my own barracks room. I didn't have to share it with the entire legion and things like that. But
Yeah.
I'm sure it was the life of a soldier, right? It's what you expect. It's what you're
Mhm.
assuming when you sign up for it. It's not something that is a mystery to most folks. Of course, there is some aspect that you don't understand until you get there, but I'm sure they had a decent idea of what they were getting themselves into. One other thing I thought was pretty interesting was the mention of a small amphitheater that was found. Now, Emily, you were explaining to me that amphitheaters, for us, it's an amphitheater. We know what an amphitheater is, but again, when you start getting into the complexities of the Latin language, amphitheater for the Romans could mean a bunch of different things. And we here at the Biblical History Center, of course, have our Odeon, right? Our Odeon style amphitheater, which has its own purposes. But this amphitheater was used for something different, was it not?
Yes. So this amphitheater is really unique in the sense that it was used for more than it was called a ludos. So it was used for combat or military training. But ludos is also a word that is used for the schools where gladiators would
Okay.
attend. So is there a possibility that there's gladiator fights happening? There's a possibility, but until we have hard evidence saying yes, there's gladiator fights actually happening here, then we only can assume that from the other artifacts that are found, they're just using this amphitheater mainly again for combat and military training. Basically, like how on military bases today, you have certain sites where you're going to do military training for your operations that you're going to be doing. So
Okay.
until we find artifacts that are relative to gladiators, like helmets and certain kinds of weapons and greaves and stuff like that, basically, I think this was primarily used just from the evidence that has already been uncovered with the Megiddo excavations. It's probably just for combat and military training purposes for now.
Which again is a little
Okay.
bit different from an Odeon, which is what we have. And the Odeons use
Yes.
more for liberal arts, correct?
Yeah. Yes. The Odeon is primarily used anything having to pertain to the arts. So singing, dancing, acting, lectures, debates, um,
Poetry.
poetry. Yes. I think I might be missing a few other things too.
It's okay.
Political discourse, right?
Political discourse, lots of political discourse. But that's mainly what our Odeon and any Odeon found across the empire was used for. And the way that it's constructed is perfect for acoustics. It's a semicircle shape. The seating is raised. There's a roof above the structure at our Odeon here.
Right.
And wherever you're sitting, regardless if it's at the very front or at the very top, back then, men would have sat more towards the front and women and children, I believe, would have sat towards the top.
And slaves as well.
Slaves
It's
as
the
well.
cheap seats.
Yeah, the cheap
Right.
seats. Hey, the cheap
Yeah.
seats are pretty good though, because you can see everything. But regardless of wherever you are seated in that Odeon, if that person who is on the stage has phenomenal diction, good oration training, singing training, vocal training, that person can be heard regardless of wherever that person is seated very clearly.
I know I was told that we did a guest lecture about these sites not too long ago. And Christy, I think you were the host of that, weren't you?
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, we did a video on our YouTube channel, a virtual lecture, and it was our special guest was Dr. Matthew Adams, who at the time was the director of the W.F. Albright Institute in Jerusalem. So basically, he's kind of overseeing and connecting with all American archaeologists in the Middle East. But he's not just that, he is also the co-director of the Jezreel Valley excavation project that is mentioned and in charge of excavations at Megiddo. So he's the American director of that excavation. So if you want to check it out, visit our YouTube channel. It's much more than we talked about here on the podcast. So please go check it out if you want to know more details. It was uploaded February of 2022. So it's been just about 3 years, but it's a really great lecture. Not only is his team responsible for excavating the Roman camp, like we talked about today, which is kind of in the plains of Megiddo, they excavated the cemetery, they excavated the Via Praetoria, all of these things. His team also excavates the Tell, which is the archaeological mound from like the Bronze and Iron Ages right next to it.
Okay.
So they kind of rotate where they dig depending on the weather and the farming, because the problem with excavating Legio 6 now is that it's smack dab in the middle of a field where people plant crops. So you have to kind of work around the farming season if you're going to dig there, but you can almost always dig up on the Tell, so as long as it's not too cold. So please check that lecture out. It's titled The Romans' Sixth Legion, which Roman numerals, at Armageddon, a virtual lecture with BHC guest Dr. Matthew Adams.
Just another one of our wonderful resources we have here at the Biblical History Center. But before we leave again, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. From the Dust of History is a production of the Biblical History Center in LaGrange, Georgia. We want to extend our heartfelt thanks to our donors and our supporters. Your generosity, your support, it makes all of this possible, and we truly, truly appreciate you. Be sure to mark your calendars for May 10th when we'll be hosting Roman Army Day. It's going to be a very fun event. Emily, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about Roman Army Day real quick.
Yes. So for anybody who is new to this podcast and is thinking, what on earth is Roman Army Day? If you like history and you are always thinking about the Roman Empire, this day is for you. It's living history. We have Roman soldier reenactors dressed in the full military regalia of first century Roman soldiers. We have live animals that are brought in specifically for this occasion. So animals that would have been and still are indigenous to Israel, not just in the first century, but also in the 21st century. And then our marketplace here at the Biblical History Center, our Agora, is going to come alive with different vendors. We're going to have a blacksmith. We're going to have a florist, a jeweler. We're even going to have one of our Roman soldier reenactors. He is a numismatist, mainly specializing in Judean Roman coinage. He will have his coin stand set up, and he is ready to answer any questions guests have about the coinage that would have been, in circulation during the times of, the early Roman emperorship.
It's really good that you mentioned the florist too, because of course we know this is Mother's Day weekend, right? But come, bring your mother, buy her some flowers, and have a wonderful day here at the Biblical History Center. We have, as you heard, so much to do here, and an exclusive promotional opportunity for those of you that are listening to our podcast. When you come on May 10th, come to our front desk. Miss Joyce will be working the front desk. Come up to her and tell her that you think that Roman history is rad. If you do this, you will be given a free Roman Army Day t-shirt. Again, Miss Joyce at the front desk, the phrase that she needs to hear is Roman history is rad. That's R-A-D, like Roman Army Day. We hope to see you there. And for a complete list of upcoming events, programs, and more information, please visit biblicalhistorycenter.com. That is biblicalhistorycenter.com. This is From the Dust of History signing out. Stay safe and have a great day.